Hey everyone, David Herbst here with Americans for Prosperity Montana. I'm here with Clint Brown, Legal Policy Director with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Clint's flown up to Montana to talk a little bit about some policy that we're going to be engaging on with AFP that that your organization is also working on. And yeah, we're just going to have a great conversation about tax liens and the implications on a national basis as well as Montana. So first off, tell us about you, Clint. Where are you from? What do you do?
So I'm from Alabama originally, but now I live in DC and I work for Pacific Legal Foundation there. Before that, I spent 5 years on the Hill working in Congress and the Senate. I worked for Senator Mike Lee most recently, and I worked for the Senate Steering Committee, which is a group of liberty-minded senators. It's very cloak and dagger. We don't release the names or anything like that, but it's kind of like the House Freedom Caucus.
Okay, cool. So, and then you wound up at the Pacific Legal Foundation.
Yes.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Auburn University for undergrad, and then if anybody watching is a football fan, they're going to find this very controversial. Crossed the lines and went to Alabama for law school.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
big rivalry there. A lot of people didn't approve, but stayed loyal to Auburn because you can't cross over.
Yeah, but you're in the belly of the beast. Got your legal degree there. Came out to DC area.
Yes.
And been working there ever since. Well, welcome to Montana. Has your state been okay?
It's been amazing.
It's pretty snowy out.
I love this state. Yeah, it's great. It's a nice change from DC. It may be cold here, but the hearts in DC are kind of cold. The government control hearts. So it's nice to be around real Americans and see this beautiful landscape.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, welcome. So tell us about the Pacific Legal Foundation.
So Pacific Legal Foundation was started in California in the 70s under the Reagan governorship. And it's a law firm, public interest law firm. We litigate, we sue people. Actually, we sue the government to defend individual liberties and constitutional rights. We've done a lot of stuff in the property rights area, a lot in environmental, free speech, racial discrimination. We do all of that, and our goal is just to promote liberty. I came on about a month and a half ago so historically they've just done litigation. They've just sued people. But they'd like to start engaging with the political branches, the legislatures, Congress, the executive branches, governors, and the president. And that's my background. So I came on, and we're starting to engage.
Awesome. So tell us about what you're in Montana to engage on. So the Pacific Legal Foundation starting up a new legislative agenda, trying to, where does that legislative agenda come from? And then what are you doing in Montana?
Right. So an issue that we've been focused on for quite some time, and we probably have, I would say we have the national expertise on this issue, is tax liens and tax forfeiture. A lot of people have heard of civil asset forfeiture, which has been really big in the news lately. There was a Supreme Court decision earlier this week on that. But most people aren't aware of tax forfeiture. And I think this is even a more fundamental issue, which I'll get into. It's more fundamental to your rights as an individual. So tax forfeiture, 18 states have this problem. The state, if you don't pay your property taxes, can take your property, sell it, and not give you anything. And Montana also has that problem. Even the banks, if you don't pay your mortgage, they have to give you your equity, your nest egg, the savings that you've put into that house, the payment you've made, whatever it's worth, they have to give it to you over what you owe. But the government doesn't do that. Anybody who's watching this podcast is probably pretty informed, or watching this video is probably pretty informed about the Constitution. And so it's going to ring some bells for them.
That's right.
That the Fifth Amendment says that if the government takes your property, they have to give you fair compensation. So where states aren't doing that, we'd like to see change. We're suing in Michigan right now. We have a case before the Michigan Supreme Court. Our client there is an elderly man, and often people who lose their home in this situation, they're usually ill or elderly because nobody intentionally fails to pay their property tax.
Yeah.
We have an elderly man who made a mistake on his taxes and underpaid them by $8.
$8.
That's the price of a combo at Wendy's.
Wow.
Right? They took his house.
Holy cow.
I've spent more at Starbucks, unfortunately. I'm a caffeine addict. I've spent more at Starbucks than his tax bill. They took his house.
Took his whole house.
All the equity. Yes. Took everything.
Yeah.
Kicked him out. This isn't yours anymore.
Yeah.
We're taking it. We're selling it. And we're keeping the money.
And the important thing to understand about equity is the amount of value you've put into the home.
Yes.
Right? So if you have a mortgage and you pay $1,000 a month in that mortgage, every month you're getting $1,000 more of equity out of the loan for your house and into the actual physical asset. So when you lose that asset, because you're behind on your taxes, something like that, we're not saying that they might not lose their home. What you're saying is that they should at least get the equity out of the home that they put in.
Right. That's right. The problem here, the whole point of homeownership really is to get the value out of the home. You may take out a mortgage to buy the home initially, but as you pay that mortgage down, whatever that home is worth becomes yours, not the bank's anymore. You may owe them money on it, but what you've paid is yours.
That's the property right.
That's
the right to the property.
Yes.
So in Montana, how does it work right now?
So in Montana, it's a complicated system. How it works right now is when you don't pay your property taxes, the county will issue what's called a tax lien, and that's a type of it's like a mortgage or any other kind of debt. It's a type of loan. It's a type of it's a mark on your record, basically. So they issue this tax lien to investors. An investor will pay. Let's say you owe
like private investors, regular
private
people.
investor.
Yeah.
Let's say that you make a mistake on your property taxes and you owe $2,000, just for a round number, and the county sends you notice. You maybe don't get the notice, or you don't understand. You don't pay it back. They will sell that debt to an investor as a lien type of loan. The investor pays the county $2,000, and then you owe the investor now, not the county. The investor has a right to your property issued by the county, not issued by you. So $2,000 plus penalties plus interest. So the investor is making out pretty well here.
So
10%
say you owe $2,000, right, in back taxes. They will then that tax lien purchaser will purchase the tax lien. You now owe them $2,000 plus a percentage, 10% return or something like that, an interest rate,
10% per year,
and then a 2% surcharge that goes back to the county for administrating it.
Right,
and that's their profit out of it. And if you don't pay it off within 3 years, right?
Right. So from that point forward, you have 3 years to pay the investor. And most people see that they made a mistake and they pay the investor, and they're paying more now.
Yeah.
Really, it's a benefit to the county. It's a benefit to government, because the government's getting their money from the investor, and you're paying more to the investor. Everybody wins but you.
Yeah.
So at the end of that 3 years, if you maybe you've been sick, maybe you've been in a nursing home, maybe you just didn't get noticed, maybe you're living out of state right now. Who knows? You didn't pay it. The investor gets your house. Maybe your house is, the average home value is like $130,000. Maybe your house is worth that.
Yeah.
Over $2,000, you lose a $130,000 house.
Wow.
And you're homeless. Yeah. And you're often left with significant debt because a lot of people figure it out and they hire lawyers and take on debt to try to fight it, and they just don't succeed. So it's not a fair system. It's not a constitutional system. It's morally wrong. So we'd like to see that changed.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is that if the tax lien person gets the house, there's no equity that goes back. So they should get. So what we're saying is they should get the house, but that equity that the person's come out of it, that should go back to the taxpayer.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So whatever you've paid into that house, you should get out of it. If the house is worth more than your tax debt, that's what should go back to you. So let's say it's a mortgage. If you owe money on a mortgage, let's say you owe $10,000 on your mortgage, your house is worth $100,000. They sell it, the bank takes 10, you get 90. That's how this works. Not for government.
Yeah.
For government, you get 0.
Yeah. The government only gets the amount that they get plus the surcharge percentage.
Yeah.
And then the tax lien, the private entity, gets the whole house and all the equity out of the house.
Given to them by your local government.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was interesting to me. We sat down, we said, I asked you, how would you describe the current process for deciding who gets the house at the end?
Yes.
And you told me essentially, well, there really isn't one. Each county, can kind of do it differently. Yes. It's kind of up to the discretion of the county. So Senate Bill 253 will change it so that the property owner gets that equity out of the house, and then it also changes the process of deciding who gets the house at the end. Correct?
Correct. That's
How does
exactly
that work?
Right. So Senate Bill 253 would create a 2-step process for this. So we talked about the tax lien, and we talked about selling the property. There's already 2 steps, but it would make them more obvious. The first step is an auction for that tax lien. So the county would auction off the right to buy the debt. So let's say you owe $2,000. A few investors come in, they bid that $2,000. How they win that auction is by offering you, the property owner, the lowest interest rate. So that over the course of the 3 years that you have to pay this back, you're paying the lowest amount. Obviously, they're not going to bid lower than they can afford at a profitable rate. They'll go find other investments. So it's a system that incentivizes them to drive down the cost, but also still incentivizes them to set their own number. There's few investments out there where you can set your own interest rate, right? If I went to the bank and I said I want an interest rate of 6%, they would laugh at me and kick me out. I want to call security.
And it's guaranteed by the force of government. That's the thing. It's more like a bond or something like that than it is like a treasury bond or something like that, or a state bond, rather than a stock investment, right?
That's absolutely.
So there's a good reason why this should be relatively low interest rates, but we're sitting right now at a government dictated 10%.
Right.
So what this would actually turn that interest rate into a market rate, where the market would fluctuate based upon supply and demand of these kinds of investments.
That's right. Instead of the government dictating, this investor will get a windfall. The government is saying this investor will get a market rate, which seems fair.
Yeah.
So from that point, you still have 3 years as a property owner to pay your debt back at a lower interest rate. There's still penalties and fees because you forgot to pay your taxes, and that's a problem for government. So at the end of that 3 years, if you haven't paid it back, your property goes to auction. So the investor will initiate an auction. The county will oversee it and run the auction, but the investor will front the cost. So the investor who has been waiting on that interest money to come in will get that interest money when the house is sold. They can also bid on the property. A group of investors will come in to bid on the property. Of course, they're not going to bid more than the property's worth.
Yeah.
But the law sets up a minimum opening bid to ensure that, first, the investor gets repaid, and second, the property owner gets the value out of the home. So it sets up a minimum opening bid process. Investors will come in, try to get a house that they wouldn't be able to get on the market, get at a better price, and then the property owner walks away with the value of their home. So they're not left with nothing. They're not left totally homeless and desolate. So it seems like a better system. It's more transparent. And by the way, the property owner can come in and bid on the property too. So if they realize their mistake, or maybe it's an elderly person, they have some family members who are willing to come in and keep the family home, they can come in and bid on the property.
Makes it far more likely.
And it also can drive the price up too if they're bidding, and ensure that they get value out of it.
That's right. And what's interesting to me is that the current process seems like a very much of a dark box that could be very particular in each county, but this would make it much more transparent, much more accountable to both the taxpayers as well as to the person who just is losing their home right now.
Right.
And so what we'd want to make sure is that and it seems like, last part is that it doesn't seem like it makes it nearly as arbitrary. And it doesn't make it nearly as subject to potential abuse like it is in Michigan. So it sets a minimum of $1,000. You got to be behind at least $1,000 in taxes before they can start this process.
That's right.
And that seems like to me to be a critical component, because we don't want this to happen. We don't. I mean, sometimes things like this can happen where a lot of personalities are involved, and a lot of like personal vendettas might be getting involved. And we want to make sure is that this can only happen in situations that are serious, like $1,000 behind on taxes, not some inconsequential amount like $8.
That's absolutely right. Setting a minimum amount is critical, because anything below $1,000, even potentially $1,000, but certainly anything below that is an error, right? Property taxes are substantial, and anything below that is really just an error. $8 is a rounding error. That's a mistake. That's right. Someone did their math wrong. You shouldn't take their home for doing math wrong.
That's
I'm not good at math. That's why I went to law school. If someone took my house because I'm not good at math, I would be in trouble. So
that's right.
It's better to set a minimum. And a lot of states have that. A lot of states who have gone through this reform have set a minimum. So,
and a lot of states. So what's it kind of like nationally? So Michigan obviously has some problems with this, but how many other states are like Montana that have this kind of process that's a little bit more of a black box and also could less transparent?
So because the process is so complicated, we are still figuring out exactly how many, but we think that at least 18 states have one of these laws that sets up this process and encourages abuse, and each state is different. So they've evolved over time. They've really come out in different states, but 2 states have taken steps to fix this. Well, one is not a state, and I'll get to that. Florida and the District of Columbia have taken steps to fix this. Montana's law is closely, the new law, the SB 253, is closely aligned with Florida's. It's very similar. And I think that's just because the original law in Montana was similar to Florida's original law. So it makes sense to keep a similar reform. The District of Columbia, we had a hearing on this yesterday, and there was some talk about what works in high population states, what works in low population states. But the District of Columbia has a smaller population than Wyoming, 750,000 residents. They only have a city council. They don't have a legislative body that figures these things out. Yet they were still able to do the reform and fix this. And it was big news. It was national news when they did it.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue. It's something that scares people. And so I think we're going to see a lot of states starting to reform this because people are going to be upset when they learn about this.
And especially out west, property rights are just held sacred here.
Yes.
So many people came out here as settlers originally because they wanted to own some land. And we've inherited that culture. And so for many of us, like, this is a great solution to, a problem that, especially in places like Bozeman, Missoula, where property values are so astronomical. It's hard to get into your first home. A lot of zoning laws and stuff like that have constricted supply and made that very difficult for people. So this seems like something that, when people are put in that crunch, that, they have a chance to, if the worst happens, they lose their home and all those things, they have a chance to restart. They have a chance to keep their family together, stay out of a cycle of dependency, and keep that nest egg going into the next home or into the next opportunity. And bootstrap themselves.
That's right. It gives people the opportunity to bootstrap themselves. One thing that I would like to mention, these county officials, they don't want to take anybody's house. Nobody wants to do that. They didn't run for office to go steal homes.
That's right.
Most of them are just doing their job and trying to do a good job. And one thing that I've learned is that a lot of the county officials in Montana, they seek to help people in this situation. But it shouldn't be on county officials to find resources and seek to help people to make up for a bad law. It should be on the legislature to fix that law so the county officials can do their day job. It's not on them to make up for this bad system.
That's an excellent point and a great point to end with. We've been talking with Clint Brown with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Thank you so much for coming out to Montana.
Sure.
Thank you so much for support of a law changing things over here, coming all the way from D.C. Man, it means a lot to us here. Thanks for coming on Montana Torch Talk and talking with us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.